administration common understanding of the challenge and the vociferous activity that they're promoting to address that challenge. And we've heard on critical issues of tower siting, streamlining, and now we've heard David on the spectrum issues. We're going to have a continuing dialogue with the administration and all levels of the administration, and I think it's going to be good for everyone. So share with us your information, give us your data, what's happening on the ground, tell us where we need improvements, and we will certainly mainstream that back into the policymakers in Washington, D.C. So thank you very much, David. Now, David and Brendan can go have some lunch. We made them sing for their supper before they could eat, so hopefully I'll have an opportunity to get a little bite to eat and be around for just a little while. Hopefully some people can meet with them and say hello. Now, next up, before I forget, evaluations. You'll see on your well, I don't think they handed them out yet, but they'll hand out evaluations during this next session. Hopefully you'll get them in the back, drop them off. We do read all the evaluations. We want to enhance and improve our subject matter. So as the panelists come up, please think a little about doing the evaluations for us. It's also a good way to potentially earn some cash. We're going to do a drawing from the evaluations that you submit tomorrow night. So we're going to have, I think, two $250 winners. So just to let you know, we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. We appreciate your evaluations. Okay, next up on our luncheon seminar, the evolution and revolution of new mobile era, of the new mobile IMS to VoLTE. You and our CCA members, you requested this. You requested these important topics to be covered at our show, and so we're trying to deliver right here, right now, in front of you. The keynote will be moderated by Sean Kinney, Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless, our streamlining, our video streaming service, so thank you, RCR. Sean is he is a friend of CCA and is no pushover on these panels. We got him because he's a moderator that is also a great reporter, and I think he's going to push some of these panelists to get some real information out of them. So let me turn it over to the editor-in-chief, and I'll let Sean talk about the subject matter and describe the topic. So Sean, where's Sean? Oh, there he is. He's already up here. I thought you were coming up this way. Okay,
thank you so
after
much
you.
for the introduction, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here at CCA. We always enjoy this show.
Kennedy, you're on.
Can you hear me now?
How about this one? Can you hear me?
1, 2.
Okay, so I think, Sean, I think yours is not working. Mine seems to be working.
Is mine
That's, can we have an intervention here with the IT guys? So make sure we, otherwise Sean's going to have to get up here and, and stand fully in front of the podium. So you got it?
I think so.
That's okay. One more time.
Can you hear me?
All right.
All right. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Always a pleasure to be here at CCA. That was quite an auspicious start for the panel and quite a lead-in from Commissioner Carr. That's a tough act to follow, but we're going to try. So let me introduce the panelists here, and I'm going to do this in brief, but directly to my right is Josh Wigginton. He's the Vice President of Product Management for Interop Technologies. We have Jan Soderstrom, Vice President and Head of Technology Office, Silicon Valley for Ericsson. Then Hans Schiet, IMS Product Management Director for Nokia. And then on the end there's Bill Levy from Huawei Technologies
Levy.
USA.
You asked me how to pronounce my name, and then you call me Levy.
Did I pronounce your
name? That's all right. You can call me anything you want. I answer to pretty much Levy. I'm used to it.
All right, off and rolling. So, you know, as Steve mentioned, this is, by the way, go easy on us on those comment cards. You know, this isn't easy. So, IMS and VoLTE, you know, at RCR, we write a ton about 5G, and that's certainly the hype train right now. But for rural carriers, that's, you know, not really a pressing priority. It's obviously something that's top of mind, but it's a long ramp to 5G, and there's a lot of things that need to happen between now and then. And that's what we kind of wanted to highlight here today just to provide a little bit of context, 3G is going to go away here probably 2020, 2021, which has a lot of implications for the roaming agreements that CCA's memberships rely on. Also has some implications for the devices that you can get to your customers. I believe AT&T's already stopped certifying 3G devices in their test labs. So this is, the clock's ticking, and there's some definite investments that need to happen before, we can really have a holistic network interoperability, and that's kind of what we want to highlight today. So to set the stage, I'd really like to go down the line here, and maybe you all can give us an overview of, based on your engagements with your clients, where are they in this process? Have a lot of them already made this investment and stood up IMS cores and started to offer VoLTE? Are they planning? Are they mid-deployment? Josh, can we maybe start with you? Give us an idea of what you're seeing.
Sure, absolutely. So I would say that it's a mixed bag. I think you do have some carriers, last year this time that we're starting, the RFPs are out and the defenses, and this year they're starting to roll out or start to the initial process of rolling out VoLTE. We still have some customers that are not there yet. I would, like you mentioned, I would definitely encouraging them that the time is now. There's a long lead time when it comes to devices, when it comes to deploying it, to getting roaming and all those things working within your network to have this basically feature parity with the service you have today. And whenever the networks are sunsetted or the devices are LTE only devices, you're going to find yourself in going back from your nationwide coverage to just your rural market. So I would definitely say that the timing is now. We a lot more than we had last year as far as operators that are looking for not only VoLTE but other IMS-based services around voice over Wi-Fi as well as RCS.
And now, what's the view from Ericsson's seat? I was speaking with one of your colleagues earlier today, and I believe you do have some of your customers that have made this investment in IMS, but just at a high level.
Yeah, and since we have a global reach, of course, and I think we have around 50 customers live on VoLTE, 100-ish customers signed on, and also among these type of regional carriers, I think we have quite a few already using or at least signed up for the service. On the ones that have actually gone live, most of them, of course, using traditional native implementation, but there's also quite a few that run it on a cloud service, on a virtual IMS. So we're starting to see a real rollout and actually working networks. We are in the age of LTE. Everybody talks about 5G now. 5G is on the horizon, but this is now the age of LTE. Anybody who's been in this industry for longer know that each of these generations typically take a decade to pan out. And just now the LTE is starting to dominate worldwide in terms of users. So we still have a decade here of a fantastic LTE usage in which, of course, the voice service will gradually go over to voice over LTE.
Yeah, I would agree also with Josh that the time is now, and from Nokia viewpoint, we were also one of the very first to turn up a live VoLTE network, AT&T, Verizon, those have been very prominent, of course. And as those are going well, all the procedures and everything, the installation have matured, the handsets have matured, the interworking between handsets and networks have matured, the roaming has matured. So really the time is there also for the small carriers to embrace VoLTE. And yes, it takes some effort, right? Because it's a big job to switch from 3G to 4G. Going from 2G to 3G was easy. You make a little change in the RAN interface to the RAN. Here you're really going from voice to a packet network. So that is a big change, and it's somewhat painful, right? The bigger guys also made a big investment. But this investment will be worth it because eventually you will be able, and again, as the 3G networks get turned down, you will go from having both a circuit and a packet network. You're going to go to only having a packet network, and that's a big step, right? It will save you in no longer having a circuit network, and having that packet network. You will be able to free up a lot of spectrum in your radios, right? That can be moved from 2G, 3G to 4G, and later also to 5G. So yeah, the ROI sort of on the short term doesn't look that great, because if we look at it at face value, IMS does give you the same features. It gives you slightly faster setup time. It gives you a video, gives you a few other services, but it's not a huge improvement over circuit voice, right? And it gives you high definition. But there are also the other benefits of being able to go to a single network instead of 2 networks.
Mr. Levy.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said here. I think for the regional carriers, it's always been a challenge to make a business case out of putting in a new technology, like VoLTE is the example. Devices are always an issue for most of the guys in this room. We're going to talk a little bit about roaming. That's always seems to be a big issue. But I think the time is right. I think the time is right for the regional carriers right now. I think that there's better news on the devices, hopefully. I see progress with the ACG. I think a lot of our distributors are doing a better job. We're actually working with our user group to come up with some creative approaches to get more handsets into the rural carriers' hands. But the bottom line is, for the regional carriers, you want to stay relevant. You want to be relevant in this market. And to stay relevant in Tier 3, you have to have VoLTE. I mean, that's the bottom line. For all of the above, for the roaming, again, building a business case that makes sense. These guys can't afford to lose money. They can't afford to go out of business. But you have to stay relevant, and that's, I think, critical. I think it's that's where we're at right now with VoLTE.
All right, so when it comes to VoLTE and IMS, we have a full spectrum here of where rural carriers are. That's a joke, by the way. So Josh, maybe you can just take us through kind of a hypothetical deployment from when you decide, I need to make this investment, the time's right, so let's do this. Take us through that planning process, that deployment process, and then the actual activation of the new infrastructure.
Sure. First, I'd say there's a lot of prep work that sometimes isn't done in advance. So as a carrier, you need to be looking at your network, understanding if you have enough sites, if it's dense enough to support not only just data but voice over the LTE network. Planning your rollout's going to be, deploying, is it going to be Interop has a lot of flexibility in the way that we deploy IMS and VoLTE and other services. We have a cloud-based model where it's completely from the cloud. So that requires minimal effort from the carrier to launch, allows for more of a pay-as-you-grow platform as a service type model. So choosing your deployment model. One thing I would say, no matter if it's on-premise or from the cloud, would be make sure that you're investing today in virtualization and technologies around virtualization. You don't want to go back to this black box monolithic architecture when it comes to software and services, especially whenever you're looking at something rolling out 5G or IoT or other use cases. Make the investment today to deploy a network and a technology that's going to last for the decades at 4G and 5G. And actually, if you're a fast follower or laggard in the market, you can sometimes leapfrog, technologies or leapfrog. Some of the traditional, or I'll say the first tier ones, they may have deployed virtualization in a certain way, meaning I'm going to take this hardware that was, an 8-core, 16-core box, and now just put it in a VM, and that's my virtualization. Well, that's great, but that's not truly going to, open them up for the additional services that, 4G and 5G are going to allow from a services, and really to even leverage the capabilities of the IMS core. But I got sidetracked. So back to the question around IMS is that, choose your deployment model, do your research, do your planning up in advance. Just because a device supports LTE or VoLTE in your spectrum, in your bands that you're working with, you still have to get your carrier settings on that device. So when you pop in your SIM card, that those settings are loaded from that device in the NVRAM. So those are things that carriers need to be working with the ACG or whoever they're getting their handsets from. Do that planning today. Work with them today. Start out small. Start out with the trial. Start out with a proof of concept within the network, within a lab. Get those problems solved so whenever you do roll that out, you can roll it out and it's going to be more successful. We're hearing from some deployments where it's like they just made a choice, they made a vendor selection, it's like, go ahead, now roll it out. there was no proof of concept done. There was no lab. There was no testing that was done that, that the traditional, I'll say, tier ones would have done, for a while to make sure that as they roll it out, they've got the devices working, they've got roaming working, they've got handover working to the legacy network. You're solving all those problems in a controlled environment versus with your real subscribers.
All right, and Han, you mentioned that this can be a painful process, this transition. Elaborate on that a little bit. Is it painful simply just from a cost perspective, or what else can be painful?
Yeah, I would argue it's a new technology, right? And most of the carriers here aren't like Vodafone or France Telecom, where they do 30 or 40 countries where they kind of deploy the same network over and over, right? So whereas on our side, right, if as a vendor, and I'm sure it's true for the other vendors, you have a playbook, you've got all sorts of procedures that you need to follow. We have a whole set of tools. We have everything in place to make it successful, right? But what goes with these procedures is all the questionnaires. We need to get all the data information, all the networking information. It all needs to be brought together, right? So what is needed. And I'm not saying this is just from the carrier perspective. This is also from a Nokia perspective or a Huawei or Ericsson perspective, right? From the beginning, what you need a strong focus to get this done, right? Because it's new, right? Everybody's busy, right? You have large networks, and some of you have multiple other jobs, and the same on the vendor side. So if you don't have that initial strong focus, and everybody sort of goes off and does a little bit here, does a little bit there, then things start to go slower and slower, and then it takes longer, right? So what you really need is an initial strong focus, because it's a new technology, right? And this is the strong focus needs to come also from as much from the vendor as from the operator, right? So if we work closely together, if we have a strong teamwork, right, this will work. And so when I say painful, what I really mean, it's a break, right? From 2G to 3G was easy. From 3G to 4G is more difficult, because I'm really switching technology. Now, on the bright side, going from 4G to 5G, IMS is virtually unchanged, right? So going forward, we have, we are in a good shape. But you have to get over that first bump to get your VoLTE deployed.
All right, so Han mentioned it there, but this transition from 4G on to 5G, how can you consider your investments in VoLTE and an IMS with sort of a long-term view on initially or later upgrading to 5G? Is it, if you make the right decisions today, can you really make that a much more smoother transition?
Absolutely. I think Han was right there that the transition from 3G to 4G is the big one. 4G to 5G, software-wise, is easier. Voice over 5G is by 3GPP, they have decided on IMS as the main voice engine for 5G. So that's the same as for VoLTE, right? So if you install VoLTE and get it to work and everything over LTE, and then come within the new radio technology, new radio after that, of course you can reuse your assets. You may need to expand to cover all the users, but of course it's the same technology. And that overall, I think, is the beauty of the 4G to 5G story, that it is becoming a very smooth transition, not only in the voice engine, but also in the packet core engine. The radios, if done well, it's just a software upgrade from a 4G radio to a 5G in the baseband. Same thing with the IP infrastructure for voice IMS then.
Bill, you mentioned it's really important to consider your business model as it relates to this type of investment. So maybe you can share some of your observations based on your customers. What have they done correctly that has helped them accelerate that return on investment?
That's a great question. Okay, so I think the mistake that a lot of people make when they look at something like a VoLTE is they look at a one-year plan, a business plan, and they look at a configuration that may be on the lighter side. And again, lessons learned is what I'm kind of talking about now. I think what carriers need to do, and the ones that have been successful at putting VoLTE in and making a business out of it, are the ones that look at this thing from really like a 5-year plan, right? The ones that look at making sure, number one, that when you configure your network, you are configuring it not just for what you have today, but working with the vendors to negotiate and get a little bit more, right? And I think that's critical, and I think it's also very critical to understand every vendor has a way of charging for their growth pricing and how you can evolve your networks, right? So there's licensing that goes into this, there's annual fees, there's a lot of things that impact what these guys are going to be paying for over really a 5-year period. So that's number one. I think the second thing is too, there's pieces that get missed, right? You still talk to people that don't know that you need an entitlement server, as part of your network. And we're all standing here shaking our heads, kind of smiling because it's true. Apple is, I don't know if there's any Apple people in the room, but they're a pain in the ass. They really are. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that. Maybe Sunkai, my boss back there, is going to be saying, oh, we do business with Apple. Don't say that. But they are. They're very, very difficult to do business with. You almost have to have a dedicated team that just works with the Apple people to get through things like the entitlement server, okay? And I think what we do is, everybody's a little bit different, but what we do is we rely on our existing customers to actually help our other customers. At our user group, just so you guys know, we open the doors, our folks come in, and then there's a session where for 1 hour, they just sit down and talk amongst themselves, which is kind of dangerous to take a vendor out of the room and let all your customers get together, because they will come up with a list of things that they need to talk about. But it helps, because it helps focus. When we first started doing this, the list was, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages long, to be quite honest. But we've narrowed down that list, and it's helped Huawei do business with our customers and with the folks that want to come on and work with Huawei. So understanding the big picture, relying on your peers to get the information that you need to get a little bit more meat around what you're actually going to need, I think is critical. I think that's something that anybody who hasn't done VoLTE yet, that's what you should be doing. Looking at your 5-year plan and making sure you know who offers, the entitlement server, as an example. Here's a little plug for HP. They do a nice job with the entitlement server. They have a hosted solution. They do a very nice job putting that together. That's something that came out of our user group that helps other folks that want to look at what is the best solution for rural America. So I think that's what the folks in this room definitely have to do.
Now, Josh, you mentioned the virtualization aspects of this type of implementation. As we've seen just across the board with the larger carriers, creating a cloud-native infrastructure is going to be key to the flexibility and agility that you really need over time to offer new services quickly, bring them to market when the time is right. How can investments in IMS and in VoLTE kind of set the stage for further virtualization of other aspects of your network?
Sure. Whenever you look at your markets, your subscribers, U.S. has over 100% penetration. So growth is going to be through, basically through new devices. I mean, you're going to get some subscribers that are going to churn on and off your network, but U.S. is at 100% penetration. So where's the new growth going to come from? Where are the new services? Today you're offering voice, messaging, and data services, and the ARPU in the U.S. continues to decline. I think somewhere around 15 to 20% year over year for the what used to be $50, $60 ARPUs are now sub $40 ARPUs. So investments today in transitioning your network to the all IP network. So now you have assets, right? You have your network, you have mobility, but you have voice, messaging, you have location, you have low latency. You can now bring in video-based services as well through things like VoLTE. So how can you, in these new businesses and these new services, it's not up to you to, let's say, develop them. They're not going to be your brainchild. You're going to expose the capabilities of your network. You're going to expose the IMS core, the authentication, the security, the trust that you have within your network, the end-to-end QoS, to the next app developer that's going to develop the next app. But in order to do that, you have to get your network and components to be cloud native. You have to get them to be out in the cloud so that developers can start to leverage them through APIs to start creating this mix or mashup of services. So that's what I was mentioning. As you invest in things like virtualization, look at things around NFV, look at things like microservices and containers that will allow you to leverage your core assets to get new growth and new services, because you're not going to get, unless you buy other markets and buy other, mobile operators through acquisition, the usage in the US is already over 100%. So.
Jan, I'm curious to hear from you a little bit about this. You're based out in the Bay Area, the capital of innovation here in the U.S., at least for now.
Yep.
How can you take this investment in VoLTE and IMS and continue to use that to drive innovation over time?
Well, that's very much on what we want to do, right? And I want to follow up on what you brought up here with, and also Bill here from Huawei, about how we enable other devices, for example, to speak voice. I think the smart watches, of course, were the starting point, but we're now seeing smart speakers. Hey, I don't know if I can allowed to quote them, but I mean, you can speak to your speaker, say, can you send an SMS to mom? Or you can get a phone call to your speaker, and you basically, that could enable you to, at least in some countries, to retire the fixed line networks if you're still obliged to have a fixed telephone. What we're doing is that, I mean, the way to do it is, of course, through APIs and through innovation, through both, I mean, to enable these services, we need to work with co-creation, sort of expose these functions to IoT developers or handset developers or device developers from the IoT industry to be able to test their new functions on a cloud-based setup for innovation, which is very much what we do in Silicon Valley. This is where we basically stand up our full capabilities, expose what we do, and let the industry come and play with new things. Smart elevators, I mean, Cat M1 capabilities, speak voice over just simple IoT devices is very important. It's available already now, of course, and you will see much more of that coming up as we enable more IoT devices. But to do that, you have to engage with the ecosystem. You have to engage with the industry that sits on the problem. You maybe have to engage with the web player that sits on the developer ecosystem. And you need to be able to go from PowerPoint to working proof of concepts in order to make the players dare to take the next steps. I think there are many, many use cases that we haven't seen yet. I mean, what about augmented reality or virtual reality? There could be voice and IMS capabilities played in there as well, right? So I don't think we have seen the end of it yet. We are sort of excited to see the smartwatches and the smart speakers. That's sort of cool in itself, but I don't think we have seen the end of that yet. And then if I turn to what's already available here and now, things like enterprise services with smart with short numbering sequence. I don't know if that's common here in US. I have since I work both in Stockholm and in California, I have sort of one phone for each, right? So, but my Stockholm phone, that whenever I'm in Sweden, I just use the short number to my colleagues. So we don't need any fixed line telephones on the office. I'm pretty sure it's available here, but I haven't seen it so widely. So I think there is a span from just here and now with what capabilities IMS and VoLTE allows for new capabilities and services that you can utilize just by doing it and getting the right players in. And then more innovation on top of that to get more sort of 5G experience and with IoT. So it's an exciting area to be in and innovate.
Han, you gave us a pretty comprehensive breakdown of some of the pain points that come with this transition to VoLTE to IMS. Can you maybe highlight for us how Nokia, as you engage with your rural carrier customers, how do you solve for those pain points? How do you right-size the solution for the needs of the particular client?
Okay, so one of the things we did with our portfolio is we essentially created a compact version of this, of our entire portfolio, right? Because if you look at like an AT&T and Verizon, you're dimensioned completely different, right? You got a bunch of SBCs, you got a bunch of TASs, you got a bunch of CSCFs. What we've essentially done is have a pre-packaged solution for up to basically something that works up to 500,000 subscribers. Right, so what that allows us to do is, right away we don't have to worry about the configuration and stuff. All that kind of stuff is ready. The other thing we've done is, we're talking about cloud in general. Our solution, of course, cloud also gives you a lot of automation. So the instantiation of all of these elements we can do with NFVM scripts. Right, so with heat scripts, we can do all these things, and they can be faster, right? Also, what we've done is, we've created, what we call a statement of work, everything that needs to be done. Those are different per customer, but for smaller customers, they're all pretty much the same size, sort of the same steps, right? So we know exactly, so we kind of have to work according to a playbook, and with that playbook. The playbook, here's the playbook, but of course we need information, so we work closely with the customer, and occasionally, the execution on all sides needs to be good, right? So if people get sidetracked, either on the vendor side or on the operator side, you can run into delays, right? So again, it kind of comes back to what I said before. Because it's a new technology, you need a strong initial focus to basically get on the road and get started, right? Because if you start, if you have a wishy-washy start, it gets to be more difficult to come back to that.
And Bill, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about the difference between these projects for a tier 1 operator and a much smaller rural operator. Is the expertise in-house? Do they have the engineering resources at hand to make sure this goes smoothly, or are they a little more dependent on Huawei in this case to make that project run?
Yep, another good question. The answer is, the regional carriers are completely set up differently, just based on scale alone, right? They've got a set group of customers that obviously they work with. Most of these guys are regional carriers, right? All of them, except for, I think, Sprint and TMobile now, right? The issue is that when you're a regional carrier, you don't have an army of people that just do, let's say, the RF engineering, right? And with Sprint and TMobile and the rest of the tier 1s, they have that capability. So it's critical that there's a couple of things that I think the regional carriers are getting better at. I think they're understanding, number one, that you need to partner with a service provider, I think, that can help you not only deploy and integrate the solutions that we're talking about, but they can also help you train on what it is you're going to be deploying. Because at the end of the day, if you want to keep doing what you're doing, you have to become more self-reliant, right? You have to be able to do some of these things yourselves, right? You can't rely on the vendors to do it all the time, right? So I think that's something that we're doing more now with our regional carriers. We're training them so that they can be a little bit more self-sufficient. You're always going to need expertise on certain things. I think RF engineering is a good one. I think there's some good RF engineers in the room here that I've been talking to. VoLTE, you have to have that design, and you have to have that RF done for VoLTE to work properly. I mean, that's a fact. But again, I think that the regional carriers are becoming more self-sufficient, and that's critical. I think that vendors need to continue to do more to help the regional carriers be that way, right? And I go back to the training, and I go back to peer education. I think that's great also. So I think that's the biggest difference right now between the regionals and the tier 1s.
All right, very good. And Josh, Bill just mentioned there this potential Sprint T-Mobile merger. We talked a little bit earlier about roaming agreements. Could you share your perspective on if this merger goes through, what does that mean for the planning around VoLTE and IMS as it relates to these roaming agreements? What are some of these considerations that need to be front and center?
Sure. So there definitely are a lot of challenges around roaming for mobile operators once they deploy voice over LTE. The way that the networks and the interconnects are being developed and rolled out, it's a thing called S8 home routing, where basically the home network is going to be doing the call control, and it just kind of goes across the data pipe, to simplify, it goes across the LTE data pipe, back to the home network, back to the home IMS core, where, it involves their IMS core, their TAS and everything. Well, that's great, but what happens if, I'm a customer in, a Bluegrass Cellular customer, and I'm in Puerto Rico, and everything's going back, but I call 911. So there's an issue around 911 and local breakout, in that you need to break out that emergency call local in the network, but the way it's designed is that everything goes back home. You can't deliver that to a PSAP that's in North Carolina or wherever your home network is. So there have been some challenges around that. As well as additional challenges around other location-based services. Today we take them for granted around 311, 711, 811. Well, those require location to really send you to the right, whether it be where to dig, customer information, or these other services. So if that's all going back to the home network, but you're roaming somewhere else, those are some of the challenges that need to be solved around VoLTE. And obviously there's a lot of CDMA carriers now have access to, basically who were GSM, so that gives them opportunities financial. Part of the business case that we've seen for rural operators is additional inbound roaming revenue, where whether they be, European subscribers that are roaming in their network, or AT&T or T-Mobile subscribers that are now roaming in their network, they can now roam on their network, where previously, being one CDMA and one GSM, there was compatibility issues.
Jan, you mentioned a lot about IoT and how that's making inroads at both consumer and enterprise and industrial level. I'm curious, if we look beyond LTE into 5G, how do you see that being deployed over time in rural America? Do you think it'll be something that is initially purpose-built in service of a particular application? And I mean, I'm thinking of oil and gas and mining particularly. These are rural activities. So I'm curious how you see 5G creating value in rural America.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it has to do with the coverage. 5G is of course fantastic for high performance, high speed, and depending on which frequency you have more or less coverage. We have a lot of these kind of questions, for example, in Australia, where we do business with Telstra, and they have the same questions for their rural mines, etc. And the question is, shall we build a private network for LTE or for 5G, or can it be covered from the carriers? I think it's the same kind of question for rural America, where you have spots where that needs to be covered. I think you will. Given that we are in the age of LTE networks will be built out to denser and denser coverage, also in the rural America and through the regional carriers. Those sites will, of course, be able to upgrade. We'll be able to upgrade to 5G as that sort of matures, to do this sort of spot coverage for where you won't need the extra capacity, and maybe have the LTE as the fallback when you don't need that particular case. So I think it's an important question. I think it is, though, it's the same as with every generation of mobile networks. You start somewhere where you have the big needs, and you gradually grow out to the outer bounds of the network, get better and better capability, and that will happen here as well. There could, of course, be spots in the country where you need some kind of government help as well to give specific coverage, as we heard from the commissioner today.
And Han, a little bit more on that topic, and we kind of glanced past it earlier, but when you're making these investments today with an eye on 5G at some other point in time, Can you do this through a software upgrade, or do you have to go touch all those sites again?
Well, from an IMS perspective, it will be a straight software update, right? Because if you look at the kind of changes, and I'm not a standards person, I used to be 20 years ago, but the kind of things that are changing are, in going to 5G, you're not going to have fallback to circuit switch anymore, right? And there are some changes relative to, that are related to the radio. So those are going to be very straightforward, because the changes aren't going to be major. These are going to be straight updates, right? And even when you go back from 2G to 3G, we were able to do software upgrades from 2G to 3G. You didn't have to basically replace everything, right? So definitely from 4G to 5G, from an IMS perspective, that shouldn't be an issue. I would again, I'm not an LTE person, but from what I understand, the evolution of the products in Nokia at least is a very clear evolution from MME, SMP gateway to AMF, UPF, all those functions. And again, the expectation is that those can be software upgrades as well.
All right, and they're giving me the nod off stage here. We're getting towards the end of our time, so I thought maybe we could just kind of go down the line here, share some final thoughts, and really kind of reinforce the key messages that you've shared. Obviously, time is of the essence when it comes to this, but Bill, could you maybe get us started?
Sure. I was listening to Commissioner Carr talk, so I switched my final thoughts to something that he was talking about. I think the U.S. is behind right now in the 5G deployment. I think that when you look at the 2 million base stations that he was referring to in China that are being deployed, Huawei has deployed 90% of those 5G base stations. And I know I'm patting myself on the back here, and we're patting our company on the back, but Huawei is going to be a $100 billion company this year. We invest $15 billion annually into our R&D department. And there's a reason why, and I know this is going to sound, I think that's actually more than my competitors combined actually right now, that $15 billion R&D number. So I think, this is going to sound, I got to finish this thought. I don't want people to say, oh God, it's so arrogant what he just said, but Huawei doesn't need the USA, okay? That doesn't mean we're leaving the USA, but it means that the company is going to be successful. No matter what happens with all the political stuff that's going on here in the U.S. Now, me personally, the folks in this room, we have very good partnerships here in this room. We're not going anywhere. It's part of what we do. We're loyal to our customers. But I do think that when you look at partnerships for the future and you look at health of the businesses that we're all looking at right now, we can't be short-sighted and let political jargon get in the way of good decision-making. So that's my 2 cents.
Josh, final thoughts. What, if you remember nothing else from this panel, what should it be?
I would say start today. Start your investment today. Get on the road today. Be focused, but look beyond just a traditional VoLTE, because VoLTE is voice. We have voice. Yes, it's HD, quicker call setup times. You could refarm some of the spectrum for data. Those are all things, but as a business, look at the tier ones. Look how they're evolving. Look at how they're getting into media and IoT and M2M. If you're going to survive in this as a carrier, you need to be innovative. You need to be innovating your networks. You need to transition and consolidate your networks to get them all on the same path, all on the same technology, and then start to expose those capabilities and leverage your assets in rural America. What are the use cases that are local in your region, that are local, like whether it be through farming, agricultural, mining? What are the use cases where you're going to now redefine yourself as a company? Because as I mentioned, that's what you need to do. Get started on it today. The networks are sunsetting, and you're going to need a nationwide footprint, but you're also going to need a network that's going to allow you to roll out innovative new services, whether it's VoLTE-based services, RCS and chatbots and IoT and M2M. Start the planning today and get on the road.
Jan?
I would say be proud. Be proud that you're part of a global industry that are able to sort out this solution end-to-end globally across continents and companies and countries. No other industry, I think, than the telecom has been able to do that. The IT industry are fantastic in building open source and fast innovation, but they are not super good in creating global standards where everybody can compete. Be proud to be part of that industry. We have been able to go from regional standards in 1G and 2G and 3G to truly global standards. In that regards, I support Bill. We should really leverage that global scale and capability. Because if we don't, there will be a winner-take-it-all markets, and that will not be good for regional carriers. So be proud to be part of this global market, and let's make IMS and VoLTE be end-to-end.
Han, you have 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Okay, so again, same thing. I have a similar message. Charge ahead with VoLTE, and with not just with VoLTE, but also everything that's happening. Josh was alluding to, all the virtualization and the cloudification of the networks. Right, there's a lot of stuff that comes with it. We're working hard. We're working hard on things like containerization, microservices. All those things will improve, upgradability of the system, flexibility of the system, right? So I really say, embrace. There's a lot of very exciting stuff that's going on. I would say embrace that, and also, the fortunate thing is that a lot of these things are being done, through the big operators like AT&T, Verizon, Orange, Deutsche Telekom, you name them, right? So the smaller carriers can benefit from all that, and so I'd say, charge ahead, and it takes a determined effort.
All right, very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your perspective, and everybody in the audience, let's have a round of applause for these guys.
Thank you. Thank you for your expertise. A lot of technical issues we went over there, so hope you all followed it. I had a tough time at times. Thank you to Sprint for hosting our lunch. Appreciate it. And speaking of sponsors, I'd like to take a moment to thank our Pinnacle sponsors. Made this possible: Ericsson, Huawei, Interop Technologies, Nokia, Sprint, T-Mobile, and TNS. Your evaluation forms. Now I think we do have the evaluation forms. I kept looking for them before. I think they were handed out. Please fill it out. Have a chance to win some cash, as well as give us your feedback. If you see one of the Pinnacle sponsors, please stop by their booth, but also say thank you. It wouldn't have been possible without their sponsorships. The reminder, the exhibit hall will be open from 2 o'clock till 6:30. And for all our associate members, at 2:15 on the floor, as usual, we'll have associate member meeting, just a short meeting, go over some of the things that are happening at the association. Hopefully you can join us there. Make sure you go by and see the booths. I think we're going to have Passport to Prizes, another opportunity to earn a little cash and also learn a little more about the service offerings of all the exhibitors. So please pick up your Passport to Prizes little card. You get it stamped and you fill it out and you win money. Next series of seminars starts in about 10 minutes, 1:30. It'll go to 3:30. And I certainly hope you check those out. After the seminars, please join us in the exhibit hall. We'll have refreshments and hopefully a lot of opportunities to meet and greet people. Thank you for the friends at TNS for sponsoring the happy hour tonight on the exhibit hall. So please come by and join us. And I was told that I had demoted or promoted David Reddle to Department of Agriculture. I meant NTIA. He's helping us with the Department of Agriculture, and I hope that he'll do a good job in ensuring that they have the same information that NTIA has. It'll be to our benefit. So thank you one and all. Have a productive afternoon. Thank you, RCR. Have a good evening.